This is just going to be a quick unboxing of the Sony 28-70mm f2 G Master lens. The Sony 28-70mm f2 lens is actually the most expensive lens that I've purchased to this day. It was actually the hardest decision I've had to make, and I watched countless reviews on this lens up until this point. The idea of this lens is actually to replace a set of prime lenses. I actually have all the f1.4 GMs excluding the 85mm. That one's a Sigma for me. But I also do have the f1.8 variants of these focal lengths just when I want to travel a bit lighter. Despite the f1.8 lenses actually resolving the weight issue, I still have to switch lenses out, and that can be a bit of a nuisance sometimes, especially at a fast-paced event. So I'm hoping that the f2 in this lens, with it being a zoom lens, can actually rectify that issue for me, and I can actually consolidate all of those lenses into one and never have to change lenses again at an event. For the most part, when it comes to lenses, a 24-70 range is actually quite usable for me when it comes to event work. I rarely need to venture further than that in the telephoto range, and if I do, I shoot an A1 for the most part, so I can always crop in if needed. And in those odd moments where I do actually need a telephoto lens, I would always carry around a telephoto with me, whether that be the 85mm prime or a 35-150 f2.8. After I've lived with the lens and actually kind of like taken on a few shoots, I will actually do a follow-up review of this lens. But for the moment, just a quick comparison and just to kind of discuss some of my considerations when I was purchasing this lens. Before I purchased this lens, I was actually thinking it's going to be really big, bulky and heavy, but then I was seeing all the reviews and they kept saying despite its size, it doesn't actually feel that heavy. And for the most part, holding them side by side, there's not a huge weight difference between them, not at least as I feel it. I can't remember the specs that are between the two lenses. I know that the 28-70 is at 918 grams. I can't recall what the 24-70 is. But in reality, holding the lenses, it's not drastically too far apart in terms of weight and how they feel. The one thing that I will say that is really noticeable though, is how thick this lens is. Looking from the top down view, you can actually see it's so much more thicker than that. In every review that I've seen of the 28-70, they always discuss how fast the autofocus is and how sharp the image is. So I wasn't really too worried about those two things. The top three considerations for me was, first off, the pop that you might get from the images. When you're shooting at f1.4 on a prime lens, you actually get like a really good shallow depth of field. However, I do have a set of f1.8 prime lenses, which sometimes I choose just because it's a lighter kit. And I don't always feel I'm always missing the extra 2/3 of a stop and that extra shallow depth of field that you get of an f1.4 versus an f1.8. So an f2 is only a third of a stop difference between my prime lenses and an f1.8, which has been servicing me perfectly fine. Some of the sample images I've seen online, the difference between f2 and f2.8 isn't huge. And I do have a 2.8 lens. So I was wondering over and over, am I just wasting my money by buying this lens? So I guess only time will tell once you actually live with the lens and used it day to day, how you feel about the shallow depth of field differences between f2 and f2.8, and also comparing it to f1.8 and f1.4. The other thing I was concerned with was the size and weight. I also do have the 35-150 f2 to 2.8 lens from Tamron. Although you start at f2, by the time you start zooming out to the telephoto ranges, you do stop down and reach f2.8. On paper, this lens should be serving me perfectly fine as well, but in practice, because of the size and weight, I've actually been very frustrated with the lens because it's just so front heavy. So overall, I just haven't really enjoyed using that lens. So I was concerned that if I was to purchase this lens, that over time, I would also find it a bit exhausting to use and I just won't enjoy it. And the last and final point, which is probably the biggest point for me of consideration, was its close focusing distance. On paper, the minimum focusing distance isn't actually that close compared to other lenses in its range, more specifically on the wider side of the zoom range. But when you actually go out to the telephoto side, it is quite comparable to certain lenses at those ranges. So I was wondering how much would that impact me on a day-to-day usage and at an event. And also in Gerald Undone's video, he actually did a test of the close focusing performance, and you do see that it's much softer when you're focusing close. When you're shooting at further distances on a test chart, the image performance throughout the zoom range is actually spot on, sharp, perfect. But when you actually get into close focusing side of things, it starts looking very muddy. So I was actually really curious to see how this lens would perform. I actually have a wedding coming up in Croatia. It's going to be in June. That is going to be now my primary lens for that day. I'm actually going to try and attempt to do every single photo with this one lens, minus the wide angle room shot. Because at 28mm, you're not getting that much of a wide shot to capture an interior. And aside from capturing all the wide angle shots of interiors and all the wedding spaces, I can't imagine me missing a wide angle lens on the wedding day. I feel a 28mm would actually be perfectly fine for me. I will find out over time whether I'm going to miss the extra 4mm between the 24-70 versus the 28-70. I know when I shot with the 28-75 Tamron, I did miss the extra width, but that was only because that lens offered me no extra benefit, whereas this one here is going to offer me one stop of light throughout the whole entire zoom range. And then that will be the trade-off when it comes to losing 4mm on the wide angle. As before, it was not an easy decision for me. When this lens got announced last year, I've been thinking about it ever since, been back and forth so many times over. But here we are in April 2025, I decided to take the plunge and the lens is now here with me. If there's any tests that you're interested in seeing more specifically, let me know down in the comments below. But otherwise, those 3 points I mentioned earlier, that's what I'm going to be focused on in my follow-up video. But otherwise, that's it from me. Cheers for watching.